What we're going to do here is we're going to do a Filmmaking 101 class for you guys. And if you have any questions or interest or anything like that, please let us know along the way, because if we don't have the answers, we can certainly point you in the right directions for that. My name is Craig Knitt, and I'm one of the founders of the festival. It goes back 12 years. We're really excited to do this workshop again. We did a workshop with our second event, and now we're doing it with our 12th event. So it's been a little bit of a while between the two things. Also with me is Tony Reale. Tony, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a director of photography and director at Creative Edge Productions. I'm also an educator for NextWaveDV, which is one of our blogs and YouTube channel, where we do a lot of behind the scenes on video production and stuff like that. I do have a film that'll be shown here as well. Craig asked me if I'd be interested in sharing just some of the things that I've learned over the years. I started off as very much an amateur filmmaker, no education, and then slowly built my way up. So what I want to show you guys on my end of the stuff is just how to do it without any planning or any formal education, and just making it up kind of as you go, and whatever works is what you do.
I think of some of my absolute favorite films, and they're from when I was in high school, because that was such a significant time of my growth, and I'm a huge fan of The Road Warrior. That's a movie that came out right at the right perfect time for me, and it means so absolute much as far as my life is concerned. Now, the significance of storytelling in general. Are there anybody in here that's an educator? We had a teacher back there, school counselor. I took a class last year on storytelling, which I would recommend to all teachers, every single teacher out there. Storytelling is a way of getting ideas and a way of communicating that registers with the human brain. For example, they've done studies where they've taught people all these different facts. It's like, okay, here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact. And then they tested you on those facts. They tested people on those facts. And people did okay. But then they worked those facts into a story. They worked all those different things into a story and told that story. And by gosh, those people remembered those facts so much more significantly. The ratio was so high that I'm like, why don't teachers know this? Because if they knew that, we would be able to reach kids at such a stronger pace by sharing stories every now and then. Because when you're listening to facts, you listen to them in one particular mindset. When you start hearing a story, your brain clicks in a different way. Now, Tony and I are going to kind of team teach this, but we want to try to talk to you guys about things to do and things to avoid to make a better production. Now, the first thing that I want to share with you guys, the very first thing that I think is pretty important, is idea. Anytime you guys think you have an idea, jot it down. Take the time to put it in a notebook. Take the time to put it on your cell phone, whatever it takes to receive that idea. Because how many of you guys out there have already lost an award-winning short film or idea because you didn't write it down? I know I'm in that boat, definitely in that boat. You need to kind of take that time, and I even write down ideas when I'm driving down the highway. So you can do it, and you have to translate it later because your penmanship is not very good. But it's there, that information. I want that information. I've woke up in the middle of the night from a dream, and I'm like, oh my God, that was such a brilliant movie in my head. That was such a great movie. It was so good, I will remember it tomorrow morning. I will remember that. I don't have to write that down. You wake up in the morning and it's gone. It is absolutely gone. So the importance of getting those ideas down, I cannot stress that enough. I truly, truly can't. Now, you've got an idea, you've got seeds of different scenes. What do you do with that? Start thinking about how that would generate into a story. And there's a lot of different ways of structuring your story. Sometimes, some of you guys have probably heard of this 3-act structure. The 3-act structure is pretty famous as far as if you want to write a Hollywood script, you almost have to know the 3-act structure verbatim and follow that pattern to the letter. There are books out there that'll help you with that structure big time. Save the Cat is one, and that same writer has written a couple of other books about saving cats. So, and it's actually based on the first couple minutes of your movie. If you don't hook your attention of your audience, you're lost. Doesn't even matter if it's a fabulous story by page 50. If people don't get to that page, it doesn't matter. Okay? So getting this thing now in story form, and that can gel in your head for a long time. I've had ideas. One of the short films that I wanted to do years ago had to do with singing.
That connection's so bad.
One of the short films that I did a couple years ago, it had to do with a guy over pumping gas. He had $10 in his wallet and he goes up to $12. Now what do you do? What do you do after that? And it's a problem that everybody I think can identify with. So I had this seed of an idea in my head for a long time, and it just sat there and gelled, and I'm like, okay, what would happen if this person happened, and add a couple of characters, add this in there, and it just kind of flopped, and when I'm driving around, I'm thinking about it, and then finally one day, everything just kind of went snap, and snapped into the right position. And that morning I had a teacher's in-service where I was supposed to be paying attention, and I took that 2-hour period, and I wrote out the entire script, boom, just like that. It came out that easy after having sat and thought about it that long. So the story is there. And you know what? Story structure can be as simple as this. A beginning, a middle, and an end. That's super easy. Seriously. They do a thing online called the 5-second videos, 5-second stories. And in 5 seconds, people can have a beginning, a middle, and an end that engages your mind, tells you a story in that amount of time. Vinny, you've been making commercials forever. You got 30 seconds to tell an entire story.
Yep.
And you can do it.
You have to do it.
You have to do it. If you really want to hook that audience, you have to tell that story in that contained amount of time. So we've got the importance of telling that story. And now that you have your story, you want to start thinking about writing out a treatment. And a treatment is something that can be, I've seen treatments that were a paragraph long. This tells you what my movie's going to be about. Boom, this paragraph. I've also seen treatments, I had the treatment for E.T. 2. You remember that movie? It never came out. It never came out. The movie was called E.T. 2, and it had like a 12-page treatment. It was actually kind of an interesting little treatment. It had an albino E.T. That would have been kind of interesting. And he was kind of like this evil E.T. That would have been kind of weird. But they never made it. That treatment was there, and you know what? There's billions of treatments out there. Maybe not billions, but there are tons of treatments out there for different stories that you guys can create. And by having those treatments ready, boom, now I've got that idea ready in case I ever get the passion to write it. Does that make sense? Because a lot of times, getting those ideas down is key. And somebody can come up to you and they're like, man, oh man, I really wanted to do a movie about a talking kitten that goes through his life wanting to be a dog. Just making this up. And somebody tells you that, and you're like, oh my God, I've got a story like that. It's not fleshed out, but I've got it. I will give you $1 million to write it. Here you go. Wow, that's a great opportunity. It won't work quite like that. I apologize for giving you guys false hopes, but that's pretty much getting those ideas down and ready. Important. All right. Treatment doesn't have to be long. It just has to contain your story. Next, we get to go to that awesome little blueprint of a thing called your script. All right, we've got a couple screenwriters out there amongst us. So if you have anything to add, raise your hand, and I will say, wrong! I will say, go ahead and add something. But when you're writing your script, the very first mistake that some people do is they get too detail-oriented. Now, you'd think, well, wait a second. We want to have the details in the script. We want to have that. For example, our very first line, we can start out with fade in, which is actually, we'll start out with a direction. So we're starting from black, we're fading into the story. And now we have to decide, are we inside or outside? That's the very first choice you have to make. Well, you know what? Let's start with an exterior shot. EXT. EXT, okay? And now we got to figure out where we're at. Well, you know what? I want to be at a seedy bar with low lights, and it smells of garbage, and it's one of those places that looks like it might have been popular in the 50s, but now it's not popular anymore. So now I got to write that down. And we get all that detail in one line. A bar. Now you can add a descriptive line in there, certainly you can. If you want it to be a seedy bar, if you want it to be a dark bar, if you want it to be something, whatever. But don't get too descriptive with it, because someone will read this script and want to find that location. You know what? If you know your location as to where you want to go, put that. Exterior. Joe's Bar. Now, you're writing this script for yourself, so that's going to mean something. If you're writing this script for somebody else, don't do that. Nobody else is going to know what Joe's Bar is. And now we need to decide, what time of the day is it? Is it morning? Is it night? A lot of times it's as simple as day or night, but there are also many other descriptors as far as that's concerned. You can put in there an undiscerned time. You don't know what time it is, okay? You can put in there noon, high noon. We can put in there midnight. All right? So now I know exactly what time it is. Joe's exterior of Joe's Bar at midnight. That is my slug line. That is the line that lets people know where we are. The very second thing you want to add is your action. Typically you start with an action. People sometimes can cut right to dialogue, but an action, I think, is, for when I'm writing, I always like to have some type of a describer so people know what's happening the second they see the screen. Two guys. Sorry, you want to write this for me? No? Never mind. Two guys light cigars under a light. All right, here we go. Now we kind of can see that, and we can visualize that in our head. Vinny?
Is that a street light because we're outside?
Yeah, it probably would be. I could put that in there too. I just am not a fast writer, so I didn't want to be so descriptive. Two guys light cigar under a street light. Okay, and I can even put down who those two guys are at this point. We might not know. We might not know who they are. It's still in the shadows. Next, we're going to get to dialogue. And I don't want to spend too much time on this stuff, but if you guys have questions about it, we can certainly talk a little bit more in depth on all this stuff later on. But getting your script right is key to getting that blueprint for your film started. You really want to have a strong blueprint. Now, we're going to move into dialogue. And dialogue is, some people really have a flair for dialogue. You'll hear Kevin Smith's name mentioned, or you'll hear Quentin Tarantino's name mentioned. Those guys write interesting dialogue, but a lot of times I don't know if it's necessarily real at times. I've heard some of their stuff that's been, yeah, wow, I can really believe those guys. And I've heard other pieces where it's like, I'm not sure I necessarily believe that. My suggestion to you is to really, really listen to people. Listen to what people sound like, because not often do people talk with proper grammar. Not always will people use the exact right phrase. For example, do not go down there. If I were to write that in a script, I wouldn't put do not go down there. Hey James, do not go down there. Unless it's a butler. Do not go down there. that might be appropriate. Otherwise, I put in contractions. Don't go down there. Don't go down there. So right as people would speak, it'll make it much more concise, much quicker, and it'll make a lot more sense to the reader, if that makes sense to you. Also, and this is a really tricky one, when you're writing your character dialogues, be extremely careful. This is one of the problems that beginning writers have, is that a lot of your characters will sound like you. Exactly like you. And that's not a problem for one of the characters. One of the characters might be derived from you. But if all the characters sound the same, you're going to be coming from like this cookie cutter world. And everybody doesn't necessarily have the same viewpoints and the same opinions and things of that nature. So try to vary up the tone of your dialogue, the tone of your characters, what they say. I'm sure that if I go back and look at some of my older films, and even some of my newer films, some of my characters are always going to sound the same. It's something that you always want to be working on. All right, so now we're going to go to dialogue. And when you're doing dialogue, keep in mind, there are certain formats that you can put your screenplay into. You took a class in screenwriting, right? Ashley, you too, but I'm talking to the guy in front of you. But anyways, both of you guys, there's certain formats, right, that you're kind of strongly encouraged to use. Is that true? And this sort of follows that, but I'm not talking about the margins or anything like that. They get into that much detail, finding the margins. This line should be spaced in here. This actually fade in should be way over here when you start out. Ashley?
Just to throw it out there, if you really are serious about screenwriting, just get Final Draft. It'll save you so many headaches.
I use Final Draft myself too.
Get it.
And there's actually some free screenwriting software online too that you guys can get. Do you know what it is? Celtics. Write that down, you guys, because if you want to get into some screenwriting, free software, Celtics.
There's also a free version of Adobe Story.
Well, I've never even heard of that one. I'm writing that down. Cool.
Yeah, I have apps for my iPad for script writing, and the thing about it is everything that Craig is taking you through are necessary elements to a proper script, and software will help you automatically say, don't forget you need this part. Because if you try and remember everything that I just said there, it's going to be a little confusing if you're new to script writing. But when you have the software, it's going to say, all right, what are you doing? Fade in, exterior, where's your location? And then script writing will also break it down by the scene, so then you can then automatically have cards to look at and say, these are all the scenes that we need to shoot, stuff like that.
So, question for you.
Go ahead.
What if it's gonna be a minute, 30 seconds?
You still can write this down. You're going to probably end up with a page and a half of script. Because roughly translated, your scripts go about a minute a page. Vinny, you got some other details?
There's also a kind of a news style format where it has everything on one side and the dialogue on the other. If you're gonna do a voiceover, the voiceover's talking about, the car and the MPG, and over on this side we're showing car on the road, we're showing the TV show, showing the actors.
There's two columns.
Two column style is also another.
When you see this right here, this means that you're at a new scene point. And so from when obviously I'm coming from production side, if Craig were to come to me and I say, how many locations are we shooting at? What are we going to be, and how many different times a day are we going to be shooting? Because we may be shooting at the bar, but there may be a daytime shot, there may be a nighttime shot. So script writing software will, once you set up all of these, it'll then break it down into cards, and then you can then say, these are all the different locations we're shooting at. You can have notes for those to say simple things like, there needs to be a hearse there. Something bizarre you can write in there to make sure that everybody's on the same page and break them out. So that's big advantages to using script writing software. You don't need it, but it's going to make your life a lot easier, especially if you're doing anything of length and substance.
Cool. I also want to add this. You guys both know the screenwriting format. It's very, very important if you want to sell your script. If you want to sell your script, you better have it written right. Because don't be creative with that format in any way. I've heard stories of people that are like, you know what, every character that I have, I'm going to use a different font for the way they speak. That'll be awesome. It'll be creative and people will remember that. You know what? When that script gets into the office of someone that wants to write a script or wants to buy a script, they're going to see that and they're going to go, whoops. They're going to not even really check it out. Get your format right, and within the first page, hook them. It has to be done that way. I don't want to spend too much more time on the dialogue. I want to get to Tony's stuff here. Slugline, action, dialogue, and then you've got a basic blueprint of a script there. In this particular first draft of the script, do whatever it takes. If you don't know the format and you're going to be the director, write it in a format that you understand, just so that you get it done. So you're not worried so much about formatting and learning that. You can learn that later. Get your story written so that you understand it, because you're going to be making this movie. Learn this later on and then apply it. Start using it. I use this all the time when I'm writing, but I didn't use it when I first started. I didn't know it when I first started. Also, there are a couple different types of scripts. We've got our basic script that we would hand to our actors who'd look to see where all their lines are. And let's just say Jake says, "Hey man." Okay, so we've got this line, Jake, "Hey man." That's all he says. We've got this already. There's another type of script called a shooting script or a director's script. When you get to that point and you're the director, a lot of times I will write a shooting script right away. I will write a director's script right away because it's my movie. I know what I want it to do. I know I want a crane shot in there, so I can work that into the script. But if you get too descriptive on that stuff, you tend to lose your readers if you're trying to sell your script or you're trying to do something else with it. So there's a shooting script and a basic script that you have. And once you have your shooting script ready, you can start casting your film. And now, for you guys out here that have passions and want to make a movie, here is another suggestion that I have for you. Make a list of your life and what you have access to in your life. If you have access to somebody that has an old car, take note of that. Take note of that and keep that filed away in your head. If you have access to somebody who owns a laundromat, who would let you shoot there without a question, take note of that. Lock that in. Somebody has a camper that you could use. All these things can kind of come in to be utilized in a movie someday or in a story someday. It's smart to craft your movie around what you have access to. Because if you can do that, my buddy has a speedboat, for example. Now, I'm making this up. Your buddy has a speedboat. All right, well, you know what? What if we could work that into our movie and not make it super jarring that all of a sudden they're in that speedboat, but that could be part of your movie and it would increase your production value of your film. It would make it look like you spent $1 million, but you didn't spend anything on it. You just bought your buddy a case of beer and that was it. So look at what you have access to and shape your story around that. Casting. I kept notebooks filled of people when I'd meet them. And I'd think about what possible parts I could put them in. I was working years ago on a film called Stonecutter's Quest, which was an epic Viking comedy. And talk about biting off more than I could chew. Everything was going to be set in medieval times. Every costume was going to be in medieval times. All the weaponry, all that stuff was going to be done in that particular time zone. And all your locations were set in that time period as well. So I have this really fun script that's broken down into all these little scenes that never got made because of the scope of things. Try to keep your scripts something that you can manage. Try not to maybe with your first piece tackle a timed period. What do they call that? Period piece, yeah, a period piece. Try not to make a period piece with the very first movie that you're going to make. You know, that might be a really good idea. Also, you might be casting your friends or you might be casting actual actors. we're gonna speak about actors in a little bit, probably with the production aspect of things. But Dave, I'm gonna ask you to add something a little bit later. Props and costumes. All right, you need some ray guns for this scene. Make them. You need some costumes for this scene. Sew them up. Learn how to do this stuff. You can save a little bit of money. And you don't have to, you think about, the coolest thing about making movies is that everything is a facade. Everything is just there on the surface. It doesn't have to look fantastic on the other side of it. In fact, if you go and look at some of the studios out in LA and look at the backs of things, you'd be surprised. Like, oh my God, I thought that was a brick. No, it's not. It's just a piece of canvas. So all that stuff, and when you start thinking about that, it makes things so much easier to kind of start problem solving. All right, well, I want to make this look like the inside of a castle. How do I do that? Well, you start cutting foam up and gluing it on a wall, and then you paint that foam, and it sort of looks like a castle wall. And then you light it with lights that is going to create shadows so that it doesn't look like foam anymore. And all of a sudden, boom, you've got a castle wall, which is convincing. Locations too. Like I mentioned before, really take note of those locations and as far as where you can go to get your movies made. If you've got access, we've shot in state parks here, and sometimes you need paperwork to do that. But if you're quick, you don't. It's always best to ask permission first when anything you're doing. But the nice thing about shooting movies in Wisconsin is a lot of times you don't need to get the permits that you'd need to get in California, for example. That is one of the benefits of being here in the state. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about storyboarding as well, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tony. Why would you possibly need to storyboard something? Anybody have any ideas? First of all, go ahead. What do you got?
Get a visual feel for the movie and how everything's going to work together.
Fantastic. That's perfect. Yeah. One of the reasons that I like to storyboard is because I need to be concerned about my actors, and I need to be most of the time. Let me draw a chart for you real quick here, and this is something I want you guys to take strong note of because it's going to be. It's something that someone shared with me a long time ago, and it really has stuck. Here's a pie chart about making movies. Okay? And here we've got a section that's good. And here we've got a section that's fast. And here we've got a section that's cheap. All right? You can only pick two of those things. You cannot have all three. You cannot make a good, fast, cheap movie. It's not possible. You can only make, if I need to make a movie that's good and fast, it's not going to be cheap. If I'm going to make a movie that's cheap and fast, it's not going to be good. And if I'm going to make a good movie that's cheap, it's not going to be fast. That right there is the category that most of you guys should fit into. Okay? We want it good and we want it cheap. We're not going to be able to make it overnight. We're not going to be able to make it fast. That means that you're going to have to kind of look at your talent that you got, and a lot of times you're going to get actors that are going to be doing this for free. Doing it out of their passion for the story, their passion for performance. So you want to get them hooked in, but you don't want to take advantage of them. And I really strongly encourage you guys not to take advantage of your talent. People are there to help you, but make it a good, positive experience for them. Be concerned with the amount of time that they're going to be on the set for you. All right, I've got this window of opportunity now. I'm going to shoot at the Sports Corner in De Pere from 10 o'clock until 4 o'clock. I've got this window of opportunity. I've got my actors that are going to be there, and I got 127 shots that I need to get in that amount of time. That's ridiculous. But that's your window of opportunity. That's when you start to storyboard. My goodness, you almost have to. You almost have to make your movie beforehand in your head, on paper, so that you can translate that to the people that are helping you. And that's what I did right here for that same exact thing. And now I've really studied a bunch of different storyboarding techniques and storyboarding formats, and those do vary. Whereas scripts are always the same, storyboarding varies big time. Go ahead.
One of the extended features on the DVD for Shaun of the Dead, they walk you through the storyboard for the whole film. That's really interesting.
There's a lot of films that do that. There really are. And if you really are interested in learning more about that, yeah, check out the behind the scenes stuff. Watch the comparison between there. And now there are also places like any place that's got bigger budgets, they'll do animatics instead of storyboards, which are moving storyboards. And I look at these and I'm like, oh my God, that's a great movie just in itself. And then they're like, nope, that's just our animatic. Holy crud, it's amazing. But I'm gonna let you guys take a look at these. One of the reasons that I do storyboards is because all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3, 4 shots are all the same location. It's from the same angle. So I put those together and I shoot them kind of not in the right order, out of sequence, but I can get them like that. And again, especially if your time is at an essence. If your time is super crucial to you, storyboard or get somebody to help you. And they don't have to be extremely artistic when you do that. You want to pass those around? Even if I've been on sets where it's just stickmen in pictures. But you know what? That communicates with the people that are setting up your camera. That communicates with the people that are setting up your lights. They know what to expect then, and they can prepare for that. Tony?
What you're talking about there with your storyboard also breaks down to a shot list too.
Yep.
When you have the storyboard and you know what shots you're going to do, then you go into your shot list, and that's where you definitely break it down. Like you were saying, these are all the same angle. Let's do that. So you're not shooting continuity. You're shooting for lighting and framing and time to keep everything as running as efficient. And one thing, I don't know if you're going to mention this, but I'll bring it up briefly, is you're going to be working with a lot of volunteer actors. You may not pay them, but always feed them. Number one priority, if you're going to get people that want to work with you, feed them, and they'll be happy for a long time.
Yeah, and actually, to jump on what Tony said, there were 4 different things you wanted to give your actors. 4 different things I try to give my actors. I've tried to feed them. I try to give them a credit for what they've done. I try to pay for their gas. And there was one other thing that I can't remember. Huh? Oh, yeah. A copy of the movie. Try to give them a copy of what they've done. And if you can do those 4 things, you're going to be somebody that the actors want to work with again. And you know what? Let's throw in a 5th thing. Try to let them have a little bit of fun. Here's another secret for you. Let's make it a 6th thing. If you can give them a seed of creative input into what you're making, and it doesn't even have to be something that you necessarily are going to use or not use. It's like, okay, Lawrence, you've been in my movie now. You've done the scene. I want to see, just you do a take now that you can, whatever you want to do to get that same emotion through, do a take with that. And now all of a sudden Lawrence is like, oh my God, okay, geez, I don't know what I was going to do, but hey, give me that money, kid, or you're a goner. Lawrence, that was brilliant. That's the one I want to use. And now he's invested in my project because he actually had a teeny spark of creative input. No one talks about that. No one talks about how important that can be. Just that little bit of input that you let somebody else have. I've been on sets with some directors where it's like, well, can I manipulate the script to say so it sounds a little bit more believable? No. You don't change my words. My words are the Bible. Just asking, But then, anytime I'm doing something, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 specific lines, I'll say, all right, let's say that line a couple times and see if it's believable. If it's not believable, let's maybe change it to how you would say it. And giving that actor a little bit of that input is really going to make a huge difference, I think, in your end result and the fact that people are going to want to continue to work with you. I hope that makes sense to you guys. All right? I've covered a ton of stuff here, guys. Is there any questions so far? Because this is all pre-production stuff. And anything that you can get done in pre-production, take advantage of it because it's going to help right here with the cheap part of things. If you get that stuff ready, it's going to be you're going to be saving yourself some dollars. For example, you want to have all of your planning done, your production planning. You want to make sure that you've got all your cables and whatnot. Because if you're out on the set and all of a sudden you got to go and run, somebody has to run to the hardware store to get an extension cord that you could have bought at a hardware store for, or you had at home. You have it hanging in your garage. But getting there and getting back is not going to be time conducive to your shoot. So you got to go and buy a whole darn new extension cord. I've heard tales of filmmakers going in and making a purchase on something, and then as soon as they're done shooting it, they return it to the store. Shame on them. That is something I don't encourage, but man, if you get in a pinch, it can be done. Again, I do not encourage that behavior, but if that's what you have, so be it. Before we jump into production, I'm going to turn it back over here on Dave. Dave is an actor. Dave, are you SAG, SAG? No, non-union. Dave has acted in a couple different pieces. Why don't you tell us a little bit about when you've been on set before, how long has rehearsal been?
It varies for the bigger films versus the smaller films. So you'll see more of the independents where, depending on what you get for the sides, what you get for script, and some of the directors, like you said, that the bigger films, you're going to say what's in the script. You have to remember it, you have to have the emotion. The independents, I see more of the flexibility, which is more what I like, where it's, and I think you hit right on it, where if you can get an actor that's somewhat engaged to it, if they feel like they're a part of it, it's going to be more enthusiastic, it's going to be more sincere, you're going to get more of what you're looking for as a director. That's just my take on it, where it's give them a little piece to have their spark, let them put their emotion into it. As an actor, you're only as good as the person opposite you. And I've seen directors say, we can't get it. This guy's messing up on his role, where typically it's the opposite person, because you're trying to get emotion out of them. If you have a blank stare, if you have nothing there, it's extremely challenging to work with.
And I kind of gave you a trick question too. When you're doing an independent film at the level that a lot of us get to do, rehearsal is something that is a luxury. It's like, I don't think I've ever gotten a chance to have an official rehearsal on a film. A lot of times it's like you give the actor the script ahead of time, by all means, and then they can study it and learn it. But then as far as, all right, we're going to meet on Wednesday and we're going to practice them lines. Whatever. It doesn't always happen that way. And I've been on a lot of shoots where all the stuff you practiced, we changed it. Now here's the new sheet that we want you to do in the morning, and it's like, oh my God. And a lot of times, go ahead.
Rehearsal is the first take.
Yeah, exactly. Your rehearsal's the first take. But that's the luxury of doing things on video. It can be cheap to reshoot it. You just can make a number of takes. And be careful, because when you get to like your 12th take on something, your actors are starting to get tired of it. And they're losing some of their passion for that particular scene. You want to make sure that there's still some freshness to it. And you might have to make some exceptions along the way. I can't tell you, every movie that I've made, you have to make adjustments. You have to have some creative problem-solving skills to adjust as you're making something. Because all of a sudden, boom, the planning that you did in storyboarding isn't going to work for that particular shot. Figure it out right there on the spot and make it quick. and make it something that's going to work. You got to be ready for that. Or you miss some shots. Oh boy, I missed the shot where we get his eyebrows going up. Well, I can have him come back in. You might not have that luxury. Now you got to cut away to something else. All right. With the acting thing, what about people that don't have a background in acting? What can a director do to help them out?
I think for shorts, it's find somebody at the writing process. I think you should be looking for your actors. Find people that are excited about what you're doing. I had friends do some interesting, one of the films is called Poop, and it was about a guy that went around as a poop collector. And some guy saw this, it was one of the first shorts I did. I knew the guy, he said, let's do this, and I thought, all right, let's have fun with it, let's clown around. There's no budget in this, this is just screwing around with a small camera. This was a number of years ago, but I think if they're involved, if it's something they like, if you are doing a film on cars, find people that are enthusiastic about cars. It shows through as opposed to trying to fake it through, and if there's no budget, it's a lot harder when you're just there, you're doing it in shorts because you really enjoy it. Either you believe in the actor, or the producer, you believe in the director, you believe in what they're doing. It's a lot more fun. It's not as stuffy as when you do the bigger films. There's a lot more money in that. But it's so scripted and everybody's more about themselves. And I'm not taking anything from the industry. It's just the shorts are a true passion. It's a true, you can see the fun in it. So I would always say find the people that are as enthused about it as you are. You'll see some amazing things and synergies that come out with that. And it's not for the money, it's just, it's not work. You're enjoying it, and that's what Craig was saying, is you're changing it, you're improvising as you go along. So it's not as nervous, it's not as stuffy, for lack of words. But and I think you can bring it out as a director, I'd say find the right people when you can. And it's a lot harder without a budget though. But it can be done. I mean, I was telling Craig, I was sitting here waiting, I had a casting thing come through for a couple days in Yonkers, New York. That one's decent pay. They'll cover travel, but it's not, it's not a lot of money. You still have to practice your trade. So someone like me, we were talking about this out there. I'd rather be in front of a camera working on shorts of people that want to be there, that enjoy it. As a director, you're doing this because it's your passion, as opposed to making, well, it's low 500,000 bucks. If you're making 5,000, you're going to be pretty excited no matter what you're doing. But it's find the people, I guess, is the biggest part, and they're out there. I'd rather be in front of the camera working on my craft than saying I'll turn this down, I'll turn that down. I know other actors saying I won't. My time is money. I won't do it for nothing. I think they're losing out. I really do. Why do you not believe in your? I live here. I live in Appleton. I'm here most of the time, and this is my community. If I'm going to see you guys, absolutely, show me what you're pitching. You got a script, might be a fun script, let's do it. 3 days or 4 days, whatever you're doing. I can put my arms around a lot of different things. And I know there's other people out there like that too, so don't think it's just me. The ones that won't do it, that are looking for money and everything, and Craig's, like those 6 things he said, one of the more talented, not to get too far off on this.
I gotta write down those 6 things. Keep going though.
One of the more talented actors I met that actually had a conversation with, because I'm always curious about this too, directors, and I'm an organized person, so I like to see the details, like to see how it's scripted. What can I learn? As a director, what are you trying to convey? Sides are one thing, and to me that's bigger than the script. A lot of times you can improvise on that. What are you trying to convey? But one of the bigger actors I met, and one of the pieces I got that surprised me was with Johnny Depp, when he was saying, I said, which films do you like doing? The pirate ones he made money on, but the ones he enjoyed were with Tim Burton. And you watch him in there, and I think Alice in Wonderland's one of my favorites. I think it's just brilliant the way that's put together. And a lot of people say, I don't get it, it doesn't make sense, it's a weird cartoon, he's on LSD or something, I don't know what he's doing, but I like that. And a lot of the films he did with Tim Burton, because those two see each other, it sounds like Tim would give him the script and say, run with it. Do what you think, he's doing what he wants, and that's what you're seeing. And that's how the Pirates thing emerged, and you've seen him in different films, and you've seen different roles, but that's what he enjoyed doing. And that guy's making $30 million a film. So he can pick and choose what he's doing. But I think if you give your actors the credit, let them have some freedom to do some different things. To me, especially in shorts, I think sides are critical. What are you trying to convey in that? What kind of emotion, what kind of feeling? Some people look at it and just pick it up and say, this is awesome. This is easy to do.
Awesome. I want to jump on to what Dave said too, and as far as the side notes and things like that you want your actors to take note of. Let's say that you've got your grandfather's got this great look. He's got this great look, and he can be this great character. But when it comes to delivering lines, any of you guys see Mark Borchart's film American Movie? He had his uncle doing lines, and it was terrible. It was just like, remember the line? What was the line? You know you are, but I don't know. He just delivered it so bad.
It's all right. It's okay.
It's all right. It's okay. There's something to live for. It just was terrible. But he had this poor old guy doing that line about 30, 40 times, and he never was going to get it right. But almost everybody that you know, if you ask them to act for you in your movie, they're like, oh man, I can't do it. Maybe they can't deliver lines, but I bet you $1 that they could show emotion. And that's where I think you can get a lot done. A lot of my movies that I make are oftentimes silent. I love it when I can tell a story visually with emotion and situation, rather than having somebody come up and say, hey, how are you doing, brother? It depends on how people can deliver those lines. If you can get a little kid to give you an emotion, you know. Grace, look worried right now. Okay, now don't look so worried. Look worried only a little bit. And they can pick that up, and they can do a really good performance on that. And also, here's another little tip for you guys as far as directing is concerned. If you ask somebody, what I need you to do is I need you to sneak from that door to that door. When they sneak, they're going to look like they're acting. They're going to look like it's going to be a cartoon and they're sneaking. That's not what you want. When you're directing, tell them, what I want you to do is I want you to go from that door to that door without making any noise. And now all of a sudden, they're not thinking about the sneaking aspect of things, they're actually doing it. So those are some things too that, I mean, when you're making movies with your kids or with people that you have access to, they're not going to be trained actors. You're going to have to try to pull these performances out of them that will make it believable and real. All right? I apologize for rambling on so long. I'm going to add a little bit to Tony's stuff, but I'm going to turn it over to Tony now. He's going to talk about the actual production of the movie. And that's where you guys all break into applause.
Thanks, Craig. Great job. And I always say that there's 3 things to a good film. There's good acting, good story, and good production. And Craig, you both elaborated on that, the need for that, and how much goes into that. There's a ton that goes into pre-production. There should be much more time that goes into pre-production than into production. And so with that, when Craig first came to me and said, you want to do this workshop, and we were titling it Filmmaking 101, and I was going to do the production side of things, I was trying to figure out what to talk about because, you know, there's a lot to film production, and I don't want to turn this into just a really abridged filmmaking class. So rather than that, I thought what we would go into is trying to avoid the common mistakes of amateur filmmaking. I, as I said before, started off very, very, no education, no professionalism, no nothing. I bought a camera off of eBay that had a broken LCD screen on it for $27, and the viewfinder still worked. So I was able to cram my eye up to it and point it at stuff and just start shooting video. And that's just where I started really falling in love with it. The problem was it looked like crap, and I really appreciate Craig for his desire to run out and just pour out stories. I got exhausted trying to do that, but what I really cared about was making video look like film and making it look as close to Hollywood as possible. So I'm just gonna, while I continue rambling shortly, I'm going to play our current demo reel for our production company, Creative Edge Productions, and this will play in the background. The visual effects on here are by Sean Bowers, and cinematography is by myself. This is stuff, I literally went from shooting like crap to doing stuff like this in, was it 5 years?
Yeah.
I think about 5 years since we started playing around with it. I think back in 2006, 2007.
Timelines,
Yeah.
so you're asking the wrong person.
And for me, like, instead of going to school, I bought camera gear and I played with it, and then I sold camera gear, and then I bought more and I sold it, and I just kept doing that as an endless cycle. And I got to play around with a lot of different things and see what I really enjoyed about it. So, yeah.
Actually, it's hard to hear you.
I will turn that all the way down because that's the lowest I can do it. But if you want to see more of that, you can go to our website, creativeedgepro.com. But that just gives you a couple things that I've worked on and done. And let me jump back into my presentation. And here we go. All right, so there's 5 things I want to talk about. Camera choice, blocking and composition, camera motion, audio, and lighting. I'm not going to go into these in super depth. This is not going to be a high school or a college program. But I'm going to cover these from the perspective of a person that did this wrong and now a person that tries to do it right. And the things that I wish I had known back then. So first question that anyone that ever goes on eBay or looks around for a camera is, are all cameras created equal? I mean, they all shoot video, they all absorb light, they all create images. And obviously the basics of that is no, not all cameras are created equal, but where does that lie? If you're not a person that looks over every single spec of a camera and wonders what do these things all mean, how do you break it down to actual layman's terminology? These are things that I've shot. Each one of these I've shot with a different camera, and at this size they look pretty good, right? I mean, not too bad. So these are the 3 different cameras I shot. The top 2 are Canons, and that's a Sony. This is the one I currently shoot with on the bottom. And they're all, they're all HD. That's a DSLR that shoots video, but they're all video cameras that shoot HD. So they're all HD, right? Great, perfect. Well, the problem is, if you magnify those images and you start looking at them, you'll notice that the top camera, being the oldest, doesn't resolve the detail as well. You can see you can barely make out his eye. These are blown up about 400%. And then you move on to the DSLR, you can see more detail in her hair, but not as much detail as the camera on the bottom, which you see, in his sideburns and in his eyes. You can see a lot more detail there. So none of these are shooting 4K or beyond high definition. This is all high definition, but not all cameras are created equal. And along with that, you have something that's dynamic range. And I don't want to get into this too much because it's a very technical thing. But dynamic range is basically what your camera can detect between pure black and pure white. And consumer cameras right now have an average of 6 to 8 stops of dynamic range. That means from pure black all the way up to pure white, you have stops of light sensitivity. And what that basically means is for every single stop, it's double the previous black. So if you're shooting at 50th of a second shutter speed, 1 stop difference would be 1/25th of a second. You're letting in twice as amount of light, so that's the difference. So consumer cameras have a lower sensitivity. Film is around 12 to 14 stops of dynamic range. So when you look at film, you say, oh my God, there's all this detail in the sky, and there's a lot of detail in the shadows, and I point my consumer camera at something, and it's not showing any of that detail. It looks, like it was shot with a Handycam. This is one of the reasons. Professional video cameras are starting to bridge that gap, and they're starting to approach the dynamic range of film, and really high-end cameras are even surpassing the dynamic range of film. But for on a layman's terminology, if you say, why does film look like this and why does my stuff not look like this, chances are this is one of the fundamental reasons. Your dynamic range of your camera is not high enough to get that detail, and so you have to light within that dynamic range. If you're seeing pure black like Craig's, can you come here a second? Just for an example, Craig's wearing a very dark shirt. There's shadow in his shirt, and we have, there's detail in here. If you're not seeing any of this, like we don't see the texture in his shirt and the folds and stuff like that, what you would need to do is bring in more light so that your camera can detect that. And so knowing that that's something that you can do, exactly, now we have more light. Thank you, Craig. All right, so next thing is composing and blocking your shot. One thing that I've seen so much in amateur filmmaking is a fear of getting close to a subject. Stories are told from here. When we are dialoguing between two people, you don't stand 10 feet away from them or 20 feet away from them. You're usually within a normal talking distance, and this is where stories are told. And you will notice that traditionally in most movies, when there's any level of a dynamic conversation happening, it's happening fairly close. To a lot of independent filmmakers, amateur filmmakers, this is a close-up. That's obviously not a close-up. So the point is just to get through your head that you want to be able to use all those different shots. There's a close-up, there's a medium, there's a wide. Those are all things that you should be comfortable using. Who's ever heard of the 180-degree rule? Cool. And I won't go into it too much, but the 180-degree rule is simply saying that if you start shooting on one side of two actors or a series of actors, you have to stay on that. You draw an imaginary line between them, and whatever you start on, you stay on. The only way to break this rule is if you transition between there. So if you have a dolly move or you have an actor cross frame, you can break it, but that's a transitional element that breaks it. I'm going to jump back over here and show you a scene that we shot. This is from our film, and come on, be nice. All right, so this is a dialogue scene. We have the wide shot, which is an establishing shot. We're doing a little bit of a dolly move to add some depth. Now we're moving in for the close-ups, and we're using some close-up for elemental shots. We have the reversal and a wide shot again. Notice we're always staying on the same side of the actors. Moving for another close-up, more close-ups, reversals, and coming up after this shot will be another close-up on one of the leads. Now, even though he's staying frame right, because we've established him on frame right, and it's still a close-up, it's different than his previous close-up, but we're always staying on the same side of those actors. So, again, a simple dialogue scene that, you know, a lot of people will, sometimes they'll do their establishing shot, then they'll jump on the other side of a person. Or he's frame left, the other guy's frame right, they'll accidentally put them both on frame left because they're crossing that 180-degree roll line. If that's something that you keep in your mind, your audience is going to be able to stay with you. And when you do the close-ups, it's not going to be a visual discontinuity because you're staying where you've already established yourself. All right, jumping back in.
Tony, why would we use the camera movement for depth?
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So thank you for asking, but I have a whole thing on that. And all right, so we have here's our coverage. Another thing to keep in mind is a lot of time I see in amateur filmmaking, they'll do one or two shots. What we showed you on that previous scene was the wide and then the reversals on each of the talent. Now, if you have a long dialogue scene, that's going to get really, really boring. So you notice we had some cutaways when he moved, took the folder and put it on the table. We had that as a cutaway. When we did for the scene, if you watch our film, which will be shown later tonight, during that dialogue scene, he was saying something that was very domineering, and so having him looking down at the character was a really good moment for that, and so that's why we had that cutaway as another close-up of him. But giving good coverage, you'll notice here we have two mediums and then a close-up. This gave Sean, as the editor, the ability to edit between those for emotion and also keep it visually dynamic. We have, if you look in the top one, there's two goons in the background. That continues to establish this character as, you know, kind of a boss man. And then the reversal here is just a different perspective of that same shot, so you're not constantly going back to this one. And of course the close-up for more intimate moments of dialogue. So, camera motion. And I know I'm kind of cruising along with this. I just want to make sure we get everything in. Camera motion, you're going to see here we have a dolly and we have a jib. Who's all familiar with dollies and jibs? They're pretty common. Before I get into it, I do have quite an investment in dollies and jibs, but I also have a video out there of how I built my own out of a clothes hanger rack. So you can build DIY gear. There's no problem in building it. The thing is, when you're doing paid gigs and people are expecting you to be in and out fast and you want the gear to work, that's where you start investing in quality equipment. I have about $10,000 in jib and dolly and slider motion, stuff like that, because when I show up, I want it to work. I want it to be in and out, and I also don't want my client going, why the heck am I paying you for plywood? So just keep in mind, this is a visual element, but feel free when you're, as an amateur filmmaker, DIY is your friend. It's where everybody starts off, and it gets you into the realm of being able to do these shots without having to go out and spend $10,000. So for camera motion, I just want to show a few examples of each element. Camera motion is something that, again, is lacking oftentimes in amateur filmmaking because they either don't know how to use it or they overuse it. We do a lot of corporate videos, and in corporate videos I do jib shots and dolly shots all the time because a piece of factory machinery is really boring to look at for a long period of times, and people want to see dimension in an object. And obviously film is a two-dimensional medium, and the only way to show dimension in it, unless, you know, obviously there's 3D movies, but we'll say that none of us are shooting 3D movies, and I hope none of you ever will. So in order to give depth and dimension, you have to be able to move around, and then of course there's lighting, which we'll get to in a little bit. But not only is it showing dimension, it's also showing emotion. And so I'm going to go through a few dolly, or a few different camera moves. This is a dolly reveal. This is simply starting off at one part of the frame, revealing another. You could do a cutaway for this, but a dolly reveal gives you moments for tension. You can build up emotion. It's also a great way of just, again, showing perspective in a scene, and it can elongate something a bit longer. If I just did a locked off shot of a random chair and then reveal this guy, that would be really weird. But to have that motion, it can now allow for a musical intro. It can allow for a fade in. It can allow for a lot of different things. It can also allow for comedic elements. Like we see here, he's crammed into a small vehicle and very uncomfortable. And this scene actually plays out where somebody else has to now cram all of their stuff in. And again, we have a dolly reveal for additional comedic element. So there's a lot of things. Dolly reveals are great for giving you the timing that you need in a scene. All right, here we have a dolly in. This is great for emotion of somebody feeling a sudden realization, like, oh my gosh, eureka. This could be, in this scene here, we have he gets a phone call and he suddenly realizes who it is on the phone. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it's you. Dun, 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 dun. And so those are, come on, pause. Those are examples that I have there. Another good thing for dolly in is when you want to create a level of intimacy. It's a very slow dolly in, and something's emotionally happening. People are getting closer to each other. Some girl is opening up about her past, and so you want to creep in for that emotional. You can do a cut in, but a dolly in is just more gradual and allows for that emotion to draw out. On the opposing side, we have the dolly out, which adds a level of disconnect, sorrow. This guy is depressed. So by dollying out, we kind of feel like we're leaving him and he's all alone. Also, one thing I'll mention in that, by framing him center frame, that also gives him a level of aloneness. So that's a different subject, that's more in blocking. But by framing him center frame, the whole frame feels like it's surrounding him and he's alone and life is horrible. All right, so now we have a follow move. This guy's walking forward, and now this is also a reveal. So this is actually a dolly and a jib shot. I'm going to play this again because it's kind of complicated. We're actually dollying in and jibbing up and tilting down. Another reason you have professional gear is because that's a really hard move to do with DIY gear. But we're following him as he's walking forward, and then we're jibbing up to reveal the car, and then we're tilting out to stay with the car in the frame. So this is a great follow movement. These guys are walking into a scene, and it's a really, really subtle dolly move, but you can see that we follow them in there very briefly to get that follow motion. This can make it feel like the audience is there with with the talent and allow that to play out. Now they're walking in here. There's a really, really subtle dolly move there, but it feels like you're walking in with them to reveal the main character here. And then he sits down, another subtle dolly move. So those feel like you're there with the character. Following their motion is a great thing. And last but not least is the ability to play out a long scene and not have to do cutaways. This scene right here, we see that we start out on the husband cleaning the dishes, and they're dialoguing together. We pan back and forth, and literally I'm just dollying back and forth, and then following each actor with a pan and a tilt. And so that scene could have been a wide shot, reversals, close-ups, or, as we did there, we can do it in one solid take. Not only does this add some dynamic elements to it, but it also helps for production setup. You don't have to relight a scene. You can just set it up, go shoot, and that can save you time if you have that ability to do that. So let me continue. And then this is just another example of a long dolly shot like that. All right, now let's go on to audio. I'm a director of photography. I'm not an audio tech. Sean actually is our audio tech on set, and we fill many hats. But the one thing I'm going to talk about this on briefly is simply the two things on that you see in a film is the visual and the audible. And the old saying goes, if they say audio without video is radio, and video without audio is dead air. So you want to have a good element of audio, and you need to pay attention to that. And if you're just getting started, what the common thing of a lot of independent filmmakers is either put the microphone on the camera, or if they may not even have a microphone, they're just using the onboard microphone of the camera. Obviously, that is not the best choice for you. And for people to get started, there's really two options for basic microphones. Any audio engineer will give you a list of a bajillion mics that exist, but there's really two basic ones that you can interact with. You've got your shotgun, you've got your lavalier. A shotgun is a directional mic, and when you point it at something, it records that audio in that general direction. It's not 100% like a rifle or something like that, but it's general. That's the direction. Think of it as a shotgun. Yeah, think of it as a shotgun. It goes that way. It's not super accurate, but it goes that direction. A lavalier, of course, is you see it on the news. They pin it up on themselves. And for filmmaking, you obviously don't want to see the mic. You never do. That takes you away from the element. But you can put it underneath clothing, and you can hide mics sometimes if you're doing a wide shot and you can't necessarily get the shotgun close enough in frame. Yes, go ahead.
I will say that people will more readily forgive bad video than they will bad audio.
Exactly.
Right.
Bad audio will take you out of a story.
It's actually one of my points in the thing.
Okay. So what's the easiest way to improve your audio? The easiest way to improve your audio is get the mic as close as you can to the subject. It seems simple, it's fundamental, but that is the number one easiest way to improve your audio. You get the mic as physically close as you can, because there's two things that happen. First of all, you're just getting a better signal, of course, but second of all, you're able to reduce the noise floor. Every mic has a noise floor, and when you can increase the audible. Where am I looking for, Sean?
Well, especially with background noise, your noise floor, you're looking, some mics might have noise, some of your equipment might have a noise floor, like where they actually contribute to a noise. And the greater the gap you have your, if you've got like air conditioning running in the background, that's at a certain level, the greater you get the mic closer, your audio is going to have a greater distance from that floor, and you're going to be able to isolate that much easier.
Right. So
and not hear
you
it.
could remove it in post if necessary.
Yeah, so if you have the mic further away, you bring that closer, and you're going to hear that hum. It's going to be harder to get rid of it.
Yeah, so in order to get their audio level up to where it needs to be to match the other audio level, now the noise floor has to be boosted as well, and so it's much more difficult to work with. So again, easiest way to improve your audio is to get it as close to the subject as possible. That involves boom poles for shotgun mics and stuff like that. But honestly, you can get cheap shotgun mics. They make them on eBay for $50, $100 just to get yourself started, and then when you move up, this is is actually one of the better ones we have, and the mic inside there, that's just a blimp around the mic. The mic inside there is only $250, and that's what we use for all of our work. It's a Rode NTG2. Yes.
What's the significance of getting like a room tone? I know that after a shot.
You want to cover that later, or do you want me to?
Well, I was gonna cover that in my thing, if you,
Oh, okay.
like, I was just gonna make mention of that, but I can answer it now. Just in case I don't have time, but basically, in one of in our film, we were in a location, we didn't have control over the heating, so the air conditioning went on and off. So I didn't have a continuity of sound. So sometimes it'd be on while we're recording, and sometimes it'd be off. So you'd have, and other times it'd be dead silent. So I would record room tone so that I can overlay that on the tracks that I need to create a continuity, so that there are no harsh cuts like when I'm cutting editing. So you have that room tone in there, and it also can be. It's just a great idea. You got cars passing by and stuff like that. I mean, if you have to cut dialogue and you hear a car passing by, you have to cut while the car's passing through. All of a sudden, you're not going to hear the car anymore. So it's it helps you with mixing sound. So it's always a great idea to get, however long your scene is going to be, get a little extra room tone.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's never in real life do you hear absolutely nothing unless you're in a vacuum. And so if you're cutting dialogue and you want to space something out for emotional impact, or you put like a wide shot in there that didn't have any dialogue over there, if you have nothing underneath that, it's going to be really bizarre. So mixing that with good room tone allows you to
and
use
depending on your scene, like in this room, you can hear a certain hum of the fan, the projector, and stuff like that. You might need that. There's one scene where there's a aquarium in the background, so I have that. The other one have a clock, because I also wanted that kind of the ticking to drive emotionally that he's under pressure. So you want, it helps add those elements.
A lot of times too, sometimes you'll shoot a scene and the dialogue is too close together, and you kind of wish there was a pause there.
Yep.
You want to put a pause in there that room.
So a good rule of thumb is just get about 30 to 60 seconds of room tone, clean room tone when you're recording, and that's literally just hit record on your camera and have everybody stop talking and breathing.
Or when
and
everybody's
stuff.
out and everything's packed up.
Yep.
Something like that.
Yep. All right, what is lighting? Lighting, a lot of people only look at lighting as number one on this list, which is create a proper exposure for the medium being used, film or digital sensors. Obviously, we talked about dynamic range. The film has to actually see, or digital sensor has to see something, so lighting gives you proper exposure. But more than that, in film, lighting is also these other two options, which are allows you to create depth and illusion of 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional medium. We talked about how a dolly move or jib or any sort of movement can allow you to accentuate depth and dimension in a scene. Lighting does this as well. This is a huge part of lighting. And then, of course, the last and most important thing is it creates the tone and mood for a scene. That's why a director of photography is called a director. They direct the light, they direct the mood, they direct everything that you see from what the director tells them it's supposed to feel like. I want this to feel like a dark, moody scene. Everybody's seen The Godfather, I hope, at some point in their life. The visual look of The Godfather that now everybody has replicated, that sepia tone, warm tonality, was the director of photography just said, this feels right. And he set up that and he started shooting that way with the warm tonality and the white balance adjustments on the camera and using certain film stock. And next thing you know, we've got a look that now everybody's replicated for generations. And so that is, the job of a director of photography is to make it feel the way that you're supposed to. Just as much as sound, lighting is a big factor in that. Who's all heard of the standard 3-point lighting technique? Yep. It's very common. You've got your key light, your fill light, and your backlight. This is used in various dimensions and various powers to get the look that you want. Here's an example of an interview scene. We've got the key light lighting her face. We have a fill light that gives the appropriate amount of fill, how moody we want it to be. If we want it to be super dark and contrasty, we would have very little fill. If we want it to be bright and sunshiny, more of a comedic or lighthearted element, then we would have more fill. For example, Adam Sandler film, comedy, stuff like that. They're usually overlit to allow the actors to have freedom to move around and be able to say something funny and make sure that they record it. So that is, and if you watch any sitcoms on TV, usually they're a brighter light. versus, a show like 24 or something like that, much more dark, and the lighting reflects that, of course. And then you have the backlight, which allows for multiple things, but most of all, primarily to add separation from the subject in the background. If the shadow side of their face is very dark and the background were to be very dark, then they're gonna be lost. So if you need to add separation, the two ways to do that is either to light the background or to light the subject, and that creates separation. Not always necessary. If you want them to feel like they're part of the background, that could be an element for a dark, mysterious character. That's fine. But if you want someone to stand out, it's very common to backlight a woman if you want her to feel, more feminine or something like that. Now we have, of course, soft versus hard lighting. This is literally the two fundamentals of all film lighting all the time. A hard light is just a bare bulb, and a soft light is traditionally a light that has been slightly modified at some level. There's two ways, or I should say, there's three ways to soften a light. The first way is to physically move the light closer or make it larger. This Mole 2K light, if I were to stick it right next to somebody, it would be very hot, because it's a 2,000 watt light, but it would also be relatively soft because the source is physically larger. Even though it's a Fresnel, it's technically a hard light, the closer it is and the larger it is to the subject, it's actually mimicking a soft light. The two other ways that most people do it would be to shoot through diffusion, so a silk or a muslin, whatever it may be, or bounce off of a source, a wall, a white wall, or a white ceiling. This softens the light, and if you have just, and the thing about it is, I have a lot of professional lighting gear, but you can get a lot of the same looks with just stuff from Home Depot. And knowing how to modify it is really the fundamental of it. And if you want a nice backlight to somebody, get a bare halogen bulb and point it in their general direction, you're going to get a backlight. If you want to soften that, get a shower curtain and shoot through that. A lot of people do that. Now, don't get them too close or you can cause a fire, and that's another thing completely. So get insurance. But you can use basic stuff. It's literally, light is all about understanding light and what it does. This picture back here, I was lighting her with a 4 foot by 3 foot soft light. So if you were using just a little 24-inch softbox, and the thing I always see a lot of people is they think that a soft light is, I just stuck a sheet of diffusion over my halogen light, and now it's a soft light. Well, technically you did shoot through diffusion, but you didn't change the size of the source by much. So now it's still going to mimic a hard light because it's still, so if this is the size of your light and you put a sheet of diffusion over it, now how much have you changed the size of it? Barely anything. So it's still going to mimic a hard light. Versus if you now put in a large source and you shoot through that, it's going to create a softer source on the subject. And so understanding how light works is going to allow you to get really great imagery. One of the other things too is directing your key. Your key light is the primary light that lights the subject. And there's, if you light camera side, or as we talked about, high fill content, you're going to get a flatter lighting, like we see in the top left. I know it's small, but you can see that that subject is fairly flatly lit. There's no dimensionality to them. And that's fine. This was a product video, so it doesn't need to be that, the Apple commercial style. Versus this is a more intimate candlelit scene. So we're lighting opposite camera. This is called reverse keying. And because we're keying opposite camera, we see dimension in her face. We have a soft light that's covering in any blemishes and any wrinkles, and then we have a harder light that's mimicking the candlelight from the table. And so that creates dimension and just creates a great mood. And lighting is all about creating the proper tone for each scene. These are all different scenes that I've shot and all require different levels of lighting. This was kind of a harder source because it's an industrial style feel. Again, same, these two here, more hard. This was lit to mimic fluorescent lighting from an office room. We wanted it to feel green. We wanted it to feel kind of, droning on and boring and mundane. Versus the bottom ones, we wanted it to feel happier. So we've got a salon with lots of light, soft light being poured in. We have overhead diffusion being used for the girl in the park. And then, of course, a nice soft light for the baby. And so that's, every scene is going to require a different style of lighting, but if you at least go with the perspective, what do I want it to feel like? And then kind of categorize soft light for happiness and hard light for more darker tonality. And then you start feeling, where does the scene fit in there? You're going to actually be able to create stuff that fits the mood of what you're wanting. And just as much with audio, a proper musical score will tell you how to feel the second you hear it. A proper lighting will tell you how to feel the second you see it. You don't have to tell somebody that this is a bad guy. You can just see the lighting and feel it and know that that's a bad guy right now. And that, as Craig was saying earlier, we talked about the elements of that bar and how all the detail that you can put into it, but in the end, on your script, you wrote a bar. And in order to get all that feeling that you want that person to see and hear and look at, you have to create that mood just by them looking at it. You don't have a narrator. It's not like a book where they explain everything to you in detail. They are looking at it for the very first time, and they have to know how to feel the second you look at it. And that's completely your job as a cinematographer, as a videographer, and as a filmmaker. And last thing I will say is filmmaking is very much a collaborative process. And too many people try to do this completely on their own, and they fail miserably. And they say, well, I'm a horrible filmmaker. And the truth is, you'll be a better filmmaker if you do this right and you focus on it. I've written scripts. It's not my strong point. I enjoy lighting. I enjoy shooting. I enjoy working with camera gear and figuring out all those shot styles that I just talked about. So for me, it's beneficial to work with somebody like Craig, who likes to tell a story. I'm sure Craig would say that his strong point isn't in camera or lighting or any of that type. So his benefit is to work with somebody like myself. And then moving on, I can edit just fine. I'm not a skill editor. That's not my main point of focus. Versus Sean has poured himself tremendously into that. He's a great editor, and he's great at visual effects, and it's a great asset for him to have in our company. So for me to be able to focus on, that's his focus, that's his great skill set, and he's going to elaborate on the necessity of editing and the importance of it. But having a diverse group of people to work with is just going to improve your film. I mean, Hollywood films, how long are the credits? They're very long, and every person in there is necessary. And the more you feed them, the more you'll get people to show up. So I hope that was helpful. And Sean, if you got
Yeah, so definitely to reiterate, I know that obviously in the independent film community, you're usually the writer, the director, the editor. You're doing a lot of roles, and try to get other people involved if you have accessibility to them. Get a fresh perspective on telling the story, because it might pull something that you didn't see that works great. So I just wanted to encourage that. All right, try to keep this short, and I designed it to be short, so hopefully that works out that way. So basically, there are three roles that have the most influence on how a story is told. You have the writer, you have the director, and you have the editor. I think that those are the three main roles that have the most direct influence on how the story is being portrayed. Of course, there's all aspects have a part of that, but those are what I view as the main. And a big mistake that I see sometimes when starting out with creating video and creating film is don't think of editing as an assembly line, like where you just assemble all your pieces and get it out there. But it's where the emotional flow of your story is told. Editing is much more about feeling than what tool you use to cut and mix your footage. So it's more about the feel, the emotion, and that's obviously the main theme that we've all run through. We're trying to convey emotion. Video and film is all about conveying emotion. You can convey information through many other different things. So emotion, and story. That's really your main things. I wanted to go ahead and there's talk about Rule of Six that Walter Merck, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, he's a great editor. He wrote a book called In the Blink of an Eye. Great if you're interested in editing or you're an editor who want to improve your craft, I definitely recommend reading that. This is regarding, does a cut work? When you're deciding to cut, how do you decide when to cut? There's the Rule of Six, and this is pretty much in diminishing order, most important to least important. Emotion,
story. Number 3, rhythm. 4, eye trace. Number 5, two-dimensional plane of screen. And number 6, two-dimensional space of action.
Do you intend to have that on the screen behind you?
I can. I'll pull it up there real quick if you'd like. I just did notes. So I don't have a presentation ready. So, now you can see that I'm pretty much reading exactly what I'm saying. Instead of being a good speaker. So, emotion, not necessarily extreme emotion, like our wild emotion, because not every scene has that. It is consistent with the emotion of what we want people to feel here. You know, is it consistent with what we want to feel in the scene? You got one checkpoint. Does it subtract or distract? So that's another question you ask yourself deciding to cut. And it should definitely push us forward in what we were trying to convey in that scene or in that section of where we're cutting. So that is priority number 1. Story. Does it help tell the story? Does it advance our understanding of what's happening? That's the other consideration of making the cut. And rhythm. As if you look at it as in a musical sense, does the cut happen at the right point? Does it feel right with the rhythm of what we've established already? So those 3 things are the most important things when considering cuts. Adobe wants to update right now. Okay. We don't want to. All right. So.
Can I add something there?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're editing, get real familiar with your keyboard shortcuts, and as you're watching, in order to get that rhythm, you'll actually feel what should happen.
Oh, yeah.
And you can set your mark.
Yeah, what I do when I'm watching a clip, I'm feeling it out. I mean, when you edit, it's all about feeling. You know, we're dealing with emotion. I will go ahead and get ready, you know. I'll have my in mark about where, you know, I'll set that. I'll be watching it. I try to pretend like I'm watching it as a person, as, you know, from different viewpoint, and I'll stop it where I feel it's natural. And that's where I'll go ahead and insert it, and then you go back and forth perfecting that over time, but that's where I start. I go with what feels right. That's where the rhythm comes into play, story and emotion. You got to go with what you feel in your gut. You can always go ahead and adjust frames later. The other 3 aren't as crucial, but still play an important role. If you're looking at it and splitting the first 3, you're dealing with you know, emotion, story, rhythm. The last 3 are more with continuity, which is less important, but it can be important depending where you're going. Like you've seen continuity problems in films before. That's because they made an emotional decision. And so the cigarette is halfway in the beginning and full towards the end or whatever, you know, it's more important to convey the emotion and the story and to put it forward. To explain the other 3, eye tracing. You might have seen any studies with advertising when you do graphic design. Where do your eyes go? So where is the audience looking? Are they looking, you know, upper right, upper left? You want to take that in consideration when you're cutting too. So are we considering that when we're making the cut? Does the flow of the eye movement from this cut complement the next cut? If we're looking at something, you know, in the upper right, you know, this is the next thing we want to do. We want to keep the eyes focused in that area. So taking that into consideration, the feeling you want, because as an example, in a fight scene, you want to disrupt that eye movement quite a bit to keep it confusing, chaotic. You want to make people feel that way because that's what a fight is. There's a lot going on, and it's really confusing, unless you're like Jackie Chan or something. But you know, I mean, you're going to have a hard time following. So using those techniques can help convey that emotion, and especially with the when you mentioned about the slow dolly and when you're starting to get more emotional, instead of cutting, you're keeping that eye trace focused on that character. It's less interrupting, and you're able to, the emotion stays there. The 2D plane of screen, it's basically just explaining the problem that you have with 3D objects or people in a 2D world. So you're filming 3D, but it's showing up in 2 dimensions. So staging is a big part of that. Like Tony had talked about a little bit before, the rule of 180 has a little bit to do with that. So it's how you represent 3D in a 2D space, whether it looks like two characters looking at each other, or if one character is looking at something else. They might not actually be looking at it, but it's how it's conveyed in the 2D world that you're showing. 2D space of action. Are the people or objects moving around in 3D space coherently or not? An example is if you got someone starting off in the distance running towards the camera, and they keep getting closer, but then you cut and they're further back. Obviously, it doesn't make much sense. I mean, if you're doing that on purpose for a specific reason, then whatever. But you want to be able to mimic 3D, the way things happen in 3D in life, but through the 2D medium. So those three, you can do all six. It doesn't always happen where all six are together, but usually the first three are pretty tight. And you can separate those, but pretty much those top three are going to be what you're basing your cut on. Just a tip too is don't cut just for the sake of cutting. Like, I want to cut every 2 seconds, so you're just going methodically through it, and that's part of the assembly line problem. It has to feel right. So find a positive reason to make the cut. How does it feel? Now, that's just a brief overlook on editing. It's all about the emotion, all about the feel. It's not about the tool you're using as much. And it can help you. The tool can help, though. So talking about a couple of the tools. Obviously, we're trying to do it for cheap. So free, there are a few free tools out there. I think you're all familiar with Windows Movie Maker. It's sad, but it works. You have iMovie on Mac. Of course, that's the better of the two. So you do have access to those for free. Especially getting started, that's your best place to start. You want to get more advanced, there is an actual free professional NLE, non-linear editor, called Lightworks. It's been used, the professional edition has been used before on films. They have a free version. It's by EditShare. They're a company that does storage solutions. But it's lwks.com. So feel free to check that out if you want to look into something that be a little bit more of a professional side that you can get for free. Of course, cheap, you have Sony Vegas, Pinnacle. It is lwks.com. If you have any trouble, just Google EditShare or Lightworks. Of course, cheap, Sony Vegas, Pinnacle, you can get those for like under $100. Adobe Premiere Elements and Final Cut Pro 10. That's, I think, at $300 right now, so that's a little bit more pricier, but great editor for on the cheap. And you have your professional, and I'm not naming all of them here, but like Adobe Premiere Pro, Avid Media Composer, and Symphony, which a lot of broadcasts use in films, and Final Cut Pro 7, which I'm not sure on the availability of that, but I'm sure you can get it out there somewhere. Another thing, important thing in the post-production world is not only your computer, but storage. You want to make sure you back up. Can you imagine creating your film, getting everything on your computer? You don't have it backed up, you erase the cards, your hard drive crashes. All that you did, everything that you did prior is just all for naught, it's done. So you, at very least, have an external hard drive or some other drive that you back up a copy to, an exact copy. You can do things as far as, gets more complicated with RAID, RAID 5, get a tower. Let's get into a little more technical, but it's got redundancy and it's fast. So backups are very important. Make sure you're backing up your footage or you will want to kill yourself if you lose it all. Especially if you take a year or two to make that happen.
Sean, we're running really low on time here. I'm wondering if you could just briefly hit like J cuts, L cuts. I think that's a good tip for people to know.
Yeah, a lot of times when you see in amateur filmmaking, you'll see where if someone's talking, they cut right to them. There's a scene in a previous film that I did where it was two actors and they're kind of, they're both holding each other at gunpoint and it's spinning. You're going to have, I'll be cutting to an actor, but the audio of the other actor will be underneath that. So you'll see the reaction shot of, like, if I'm having dialogue with Tony, I'll be talking, but we cut to a reaction shot of Tony, and I'm still talking over that, and we see his reaction, and then he starts talking. So you don't always need to cut right to when the actor starts talking. You can let that overlap, and that's kind of the basic concept of that.
And the reason they call it a J cut or an L cut is because if you look at your editor, you've got video on top, you got audio on the bottom. And if your audio track from the previous person is extending over and the video stops and the previous video goes over, it looks like an L or a J. If you can start audio into the person. So I could be talking and then Sean starts talking, but we're still looking at me as I'm watching him. So it makes things flow better and just better continuity and stuff like that.
Right.
So yeah, wrapping up, sound, we talked a little bit about that with room tone, continuity of sound and how it draws you in, and having jarring pieces of sound in there where you're hearing a bunch of background noise and all of a sudden you cut to another piece of dialogue, it's silent, and you're going back and forth between that. It really pulls you out of the experience. You're not immersed and you lose emotion. Sound effects are a big thing. It can make something mundane feel epic, and a lot of times if you ever watch behind the scenes with Foley, they're not really even using the actual thing for the sound, like bones breaking, celery, using stuff like that. There's stuff that sounds better than the real thing. So make it on a more grander scale. Of course, other parts of post, you got color grading. Won't really go into that, but that's overall, like when we talked with the, it was kind of done with the film stock and everything like that, not as much post, but with The Godfather, the colors that you're using helps convey emotion, like a bluish tone, cold, and, warming up the footage to make it feel much more loving or whatever. So that has a big play on the emotion also. And you got visual effects, which a lot of times doesn't really have to do with emotion, but it's getting more into that, especially with things like Life of Pi, where you're creating a whole character out of CG elements and you have emotion within their face. So that's getting more complicated. But it can be more cost effective if you have to do a giant explosion, like we'll be doing for a client that we'll be doing, where we'll blow up a tanker truck in the middle of an intersection. We can't do that in real life, obviously. Well, we could, but we don't have the budget for it. So we're going to be doing that digitally with visual effects, and it's safer. If you're interested in visual effects, a great site, it's very popular, that if you want to get a good head start in it, is videocopilot.net with Andrew Kramer. Wide gamut of visual effects and motion graphics that he covers there. Great tutorials, great to learn from. That's videocopilot.net. And the two books I would recommend would be In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Merck. I don't know if it's Murch or Merck. I have no idea. And the other one is The Eye is Quicker, and that is by Richard Pepperman. So if you would like to get more advanced with editing, find out more about the principles of editing, those would be great books to check out.
There's a site called NextWaveDV as well?
Yes, NextWaveDV is our the trade site that Tony started. I joined in. I don't do as much on there as lately, but film training, a lot of things that we talked about today, we cover that, and it's all free.
All right, let's put our hands together for Sean.
Thank you.